Hi there, so I just finished reading the book Designing the User Experience of Game Development Tools. It is a bit of a smaller book and maybe feels a bit overpriced to me, costing around 43 euros for the ebook, but the author is very experienced and knowledgeable, so I figured it would be worth reading what he had to say. The author is David Lightbourne, and he has for the past 9, almost 10 years worked at Ubisoft as a user experience director, where he describes his goals as to improve the user experience of tools and pipelines by integrating user-centered design into the agile game tool development process. So I don't quite remember which book this was, but there was a book that I read a long time ago which made the point that UX also looks inwards into what's happening within the production of the team, within the workplace learning and the psychological safety and the general work culture within the production. Because if the social and the technical aspects of a production does not work in the studio, then this will be reflected onto the product given to the users. So most UX books are not written in this way of looking inwards. So that's what made this book interesting to me in the first place. But as it turns out, the book is not really for UX people. It's more for those who want a brief introduction to a wide surface level of topics within the UX theory. Or maybe even more the UI theory, like interaction design field. And the book claims to talk about these topics in the context of game development, which to me was the most interesting aspect of it. And to some extent it really does this, and I think those very unfamiliar with UX theory and interaction design theory will definitely feel like it does. And I think this book will be very useful for those people in general. But coming from me, who has already been very knee-deep into the UX theory literature already and theory, this book does not really add anything particularly new to the UX, even with this angle. It uses what's already out there in the software development and gives it a slightly different perspective, but it's not quite to the extent where it feels new or refreshing, and it does not really feel different either. So if you already feel like you are very deep into the theory already, you will probably feel the same thing. So in the book there's a note from the author to experienced user experience designers, and it reads as follows. If you are a user experience designer coming from another industry, you will be familiar with many of the concepts in this book. You will notice that some concepts and techniques has been simplified in an effort to be easier to understand for the people new to user experience design. However, this book also includes a lot of information specific to game development tools. The game industry faces unique challenges in regards to improving the user experience of their tools. It is those challenges that makes the work even more interesting for user experience designers. There is a lot of work to do, but also a ton of untapped potential waiting to be unlocked. And if I may add a personal point to this, I think this book may also be useful for experienced user designers, because you can look at the topics within the book and you can cherry pick out specific parts of UX theory, which according to the author is very important to the work. So it can actually function just as a loose guide to get you started and just direct you to specific topics you can utilize. So in that sense, I think the book might still be useful. So with that said, let's go a bit deeper into the actual contents. So the book does a great deal of storytelling, which I personally really appreciate in books. So instead of giving very dry descriptions of design approaches or processes, it presents people in some situation and how they used the relevant approaches in designing something impactful. So like when going into the topics of pre-visualization and the importance of this, which the book says is good for getting the mental models or individuals' vision explicitly visible, which will lead to less interpretation and misunderstanding from just the basic text. It does not do it as dry and as boring as I just did right now. It presents it instead in a humorous story form with characters and dialogues and situations and stuff like this. Like when it talks about how the dimensions of the Palm Pilot device was found by Jeff Hawkins by bringing the various sizes of wooden blocks into meetings and visualizing how it would be to enter information onto this wood block. So the storytelling in this book is very well done, and I didn't really find myself getting bored much, even when I was reading about topics that I already were familiar with and I wasn't really learning anything new. It was just by the storytelling, it was entertaining. What I also like about the book is that it keeps things very simple and presents topics in a way that, in a sense of ease, to say it like that. Like when it talks about the rapid integration cycles, it does not fall into the trap of describing very strict forms of it. I know a company which had tried to use Scrum for a period of time and it just wasn't suitable for them. And then there's a sense of generalization where sprints starts looking less applicable. And sometimes, yes, the sprints and agile is not applicable, but sometimes sprints actually are. And I think an error many organizations do when they start reading about sprints or agile is that for some reason, maybe it's because the name sounds nice, but Scrum is mostly the most popular hits in search engines and very often mentioned in literature and so on, like in this book as well, I think. But it is a very strict form of agile and it simply does not fit everywhere. So what this book does instead is that it presents these topics in a very careful way, where you have a beginning where you make an analysis and then you design it or develop something and then you evaluate what you just made. And then you loop this around. And you don't need to fit all this into a weekday and whatever, like many sprints claim you do, or are designed around doing. So the book avoids intimidating the reader with a bunch of rules doing a sprint and so on. And it does a lot more casually and allows the reader to be in a greater sense mandating the sprint based on the other relatable topics within the book in a manner which makes sense to the production team. It also has a very gentle way of talking about other topics like the design principles it talks about. An example being when it talks about the principles that more features do not make a better tool, and it talks about the third generation iPod and how it did not outsell the iRiver H300 because of its features, because the iRiver had a lot more features than the iPod. So it's a very simple to understand comparison, which are no longer than 1 or 2 paragraphs in the explanation, and it's very consistent through this book. It does this repeatedly through the book. So it does things very simple and bite-sized just to get to the point, and then it moves on to the next. And that's also why the book is very brief and quick to read and is relatively short. But of course this simplification leaves a lot of information only implied in the main text, like when paraphrasing some Gestalt principles. It does not really mention where the principles come from, except for in a footnote on the bottom of the page. But it's not really always the case. The book explicitly references books, often also in the main text, so it's not very consistent. And this simplification sometimes goes to the extreme where I don't really think that the novice reader will really comprehend how much deeper the theory or the literature can go on the topics. And the reader might just try to wing it from that point. And winging it from that point is not necessarily a bad thing. It makes it possible just to try it and see how it feels, and then if it seems to fit the production, then more concrete theory can be dug up through the books mentioned in the text itself. So I think what the book set out to do, just being simple and easy to read and bite-sized, I think the book really succeeds with this for the target segment, which is people who are curious about user experience design. I want a brief overview of the surface level. I do think the book really succeeds on this. And so adding what I previously talked about, that the book is easy to learn from because it has creative writing and it's simplistic, it's bite-sized. I also think that it brings up important topics from the UX or interaction design literature. It talks about the efficiency and learnability and some metrics which can be measured around this, and it brings up topics like mental and conceptual models and visual languages and visual guidelines. Maybe I miss some more information on how to find testers and sampling and so on. It does talk about personas, but not so much about recruiting and the aspects of it and the time management aspects of this, because this is very timely and the book does not really emphasize this too much. So in the first half of this book, these topics are explained a bit individually, but towards the end of the book, they start getting a bit more connected together. Again, very gently. It does not bring in a lot of concrete theory or reference trustworthy research on these topics. And it is not particularly in depth about them at any point, but it's written in a manner which makes it easy to consume and start thinking about these topics by yourself. Again, very surface level, but for the intention of the book, I think it's written well and probably the most efficient way to try to contextualize all these topics together in a timely manner for people who has very little prior or preliminary experience with user experience design. So me saying that the book is very simplistic, it's not really a criticism, not at all. It would be if the book was meant for seasoned UX researchers, but that's not what the book is about, though I kind of wish it was because of the title of the book. The title of the book makes it seem like the book is very specifically focused on developing game development tools, but it is more of an introduction to the theory around the UX and interaction design in general. So I'm not in disagreement with any of the book contents and the purpose of the book, but I am a bit of a disagreement with the title of the book itself, because I don't really think that it fulfills it to a convincing degree. So I can definitely recommend this book to readers who has less experience or knowledge about the UX practices and theory, and also interaction design, because in this book these topics tend to intersect a bit. It is a good starting point just to get going with something and start thinking a bit differently about how tools are currently being developed within the studio. Again, it doesn't really go very in-depth into anything, but it exposes the surface level of some of the theory, which is important and can be helpful within this thinking process. Nothing overwhelming at all, very easy to digest, and brings up important topics again, and many of them stick together well towards the end as well. So I can definitely recommend this to those people. For those who already are in know of the UX theory and interaction design, I wouldn't really recommend this book, especially for this price. Again, it probably could be useful if you want to just look over the topics, but then you can just download the sample of the Amazon and then read through the table of contents and just see what the topics are. Because it is nice to just read over the topics which are related to the development of these game development tools. But as I read the book, I didn't really feel any sort of revelations coming on when I was reading it. So again, probably wouldn't recommend this book for over 40 euros for those people. But again, if you are not priorly educated or experienced with UX or UX theory, this book would be a good place to start. And yes, I would definitely recommend it to you. So yeah, I got some more videos, blah blah blah. I intend to upload a bit more often going forward, so if you wanna come along, just push those buttons.